Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
we found a family of 6 people, 5 adults and 1 child, and they were shot and then burned.
Ukraine accuses Russia of war crimes, but will anyone be held accountable?
Symptoms can be very confusing, especially in this day and age with COVID.
It's spring, which means it's also allergy season. Doctors weigh in on when to be concerned about a stuffy nose.
The independence of the Inspector General is sacrosanct.
One-on-one with Chicago's newly appointed watchdog.
After just 6 years, Whole Foods announces it's checking out of Englewood. Local residents react to the grocer's departure.
Local advocates say early intervention is key to treating autism in children effectively. What's being done to address disparities in healthcare access?
State Farm customers getting hit with a second car insurance rate hike this year. That and more from Cranes.
We've given out over 25,000 storybooks.
Meet a woman on a mission to heal and empower kids through books.
It's important that we remember who we were to know who we can become.
And exploring the Black Victorian era in a new production now playing at the Goodman Theater. But first, some of today's top stories. New police data shows the number of shootings and homicides in the city has decreased this year compared to last. This comes as 8 people, including 2 teens, were killed in shootings over the weekend across Chicago. 178 people have been killed in the city so far this year, which marks a 7% decline over the same time last year. Last month alone, there were 49 homicides, the fewest of any April since 2018, and a 9% decline from April 2021. Police Superintendent David Brown says the department is deploying officers to areas experiencing displacement as soon as this week.
Downtown, apart from other neighborhoods. It's a neighborhood just like any other neighborhood in the city we've seen some displacement issues where we don't normally have the types of crime that are happening in various neighborhoods across the city. We are having to now deploy even more officers in our deployment strategy and our rotations. I'm hoping to start some of that deployment tomorrow and continue that through the rest of the month and really through Labor Day, if not beyond.
Meanwhile, some organizations are taking matters into their own hands ahead of the summer months, creating violence prevention programs. Organizers at faith-based Christian Air have created Passport for Peace through a $500,000 state grant. The program takes a special focus on South Shore, the 4th deadliest neighborhood in the city.
It's us as an organization identifying people in our community that are at risk, that are at the most at risk of gun violence. Young men or women that have been victims of gun violence or have been incarcerated or arrested for gun possession. We want to identify those young men and women, and we want to try to give them a lifestyle, give them an opportunity, a passport to get out of that lifestyle. And we're going to do that by taking them out of town on expeditions, taking them on exploratory campaigns, taking them to places they never been.
A theater, a historic museum, and a coffee shop are among the finalists in the city's next round of community development grants. The projects are valued at about $138 million in total costs, funded by the Chicago Recovery Plan, which is intended to help the city recover from the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Among the grantees are Magnifico Coffee Roasters in Avondale, the Mojo Museum in Kenwood, which will carry on the legacy of Muddy Waters, and in the Loop, the Harris Theater for Music and Dance. In total, the city will fund 26 projects to the tune of $33.5 million in this first round of grants. Up next, how to tell the difference between allergy symptoms and COVID-19. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Coronavirus cases are climbing again. A handful of Illinois counties, including suburban Cook County, are at medium risk of transmission. But a lot of other things are going around too. Amanda Vinicky spoke with several doctors today and is here to share their advice and insight on how to tell whether you've got COVID or just plain old allergies. Amanda.
Yeah, Paris, it has been gloomy, gray, it has been cold, but flowers are beginning to bloom and trees are growing buds, signs that spring is arriving in earnest. And it's lovely, but for those with seasonal allergies, nature's beauty can come at a price. Clogged sinuses. And that is prompting calls to Rush primary care physician Lisa Ravindra.
We're hearing all of it, and it's really an uptick in the last couple of weeks. And it is so hard to tell, especially over video visit or telephone or my chart message, what we're dealing with. There's so much overlap in all of the symptoms, from a cold to COVID to another upper respiratory symptom to allergies, the flu. All of it's out there right now, and it's so hard to tell. So people are presenting with stuffy nose, nasal congestion, cough, a lot of postnasal drip. I'm seeing sore throats.
A whole lot of yuck that Dr. Allison Bartlett has likewise seen when she's working with patients at the University of Chicago's Comer Children's Hospital. She says she also lived it when members of her family got a non-COVID, non-flu respiratory virus. And she too says it can be hard to decipher what is what, though there are some clues.
There's so much overlap, and some of the other viruses that aren't COVID or flu are even trickier to solve. But certainly, right, a fever, feeling so exhausted that you can't get up and get going, those we don't think about in terms of allergies. We think about those more in terms of an infection, as opposed to the sneezing and itchy eyes and sort of itchy nose and mouth. That suggests more allergies.
Another trick, check out Loyola Medicine's allergy count tweet of the day. No worries today on grass or weeds, but it is tree allergy time. Loyola has done a pollen count for decades, and it is Dr. Rashna Shah's responsibility now. Shah says that literally this involves sampling the amount of pollen in the air in the metropolitan Chicago area over a 24-hour period using this machine that's on the roof.
And it has a slide. And this slide moves every 15 seconds and sucks the air that's kind of floating by it. And the pollen deposits on that slide. And then what we do is we bring that slide down every day and we read that slide. And by reading the slide, I mean we stain it, and then we literally are counting how many tree pollens and what kind of tree pollens, how many mold spores, all of that.
And that is helpful information to scientists, to doctors for any number of reasons, but it also can be helpful to those of us who wonder if we're suffering from allergies, from COVID, or from something else. Shah says that grass season should be starting any day now. The tree allergy season, it is lasting longer. With climate change, both trees and grasses are producing more pollen and can be more allergenic. So if you know your triggers, check out the daily count. You can also look at the chart that shows if you're in what I'm going to unscientifically dub the red eyes and nose range.
Looking at that data, looking at those reports kind of allow us to form patterns with our symptoms. So let's say one day trees are high and we have more symptoms, and then the next day trees are low and we have much less symptoms, then that correlation is sometimes very important.
Now, losing your sense of taste or of smell, as we heard a lot about early in COVID, that is a COVID-19 symptom, not likely to be allergies. But Shah says with recent variants, that's less common, and so it is much harder to tell. Dr. Bartlett has a suggestion. Take allergy meds, see if they help. Also, she says, as temperatures rise, as it's hopefully going to be nicer to be outside, social activities outdoors are certainly safer. Otherwise, she says her COVID risk-benefit analysis goes something like this.
I'm vaccinated, my family's vaccinated, so that's a nice layer of protection for us. But there are plenty of people who are unvaccinated or immunocompromised, or all of our children who are less than 5 are unable to be vaccinated. And so those are potentially concerning features. I think about the protection that had been afforded by knowing anywhere I went out in public, people would be masking to protect themselves and me. That's gone. So that ramps up my risk a little bit.
Again, she says this is all a risk-benefit analysis, and if there is any doubt, you should really take a COVID test.
Allergy symptoms, if it's something that patients get every year around this time and it's similar to the symptoms that they're having now, that's a good sign. But I think it's always safer to get the COVID test.
And if you don't feel well, then stay home. If you're unable to do that, please do. Doctors all say wear a mask for the protection of yourself and for the protection of others, regardless of any government mandate or lack thereof, because getting sick with COVID or other respiratory infections is nothing to sneeze at. Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. President Joe Biden is asking Congress to approve another massive package of military and humanitarian aid for Ukraine's government. This as evidence of Russian war crimes in Ukraine continues to mount. But will it be enough to ensure Ukraine prevails against a brutal Russian army assault that is leveling cities and targeting civilians? And joining us now are Elizabeth Shackelford, Senior Fellow on U.S. Foreign Policy at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Shackelford was a career diplomat until 2017 when she resigned to protest what she saw as the hollowing out of the State Department during the Trump administration. And Tom Ginsberg, professor of international law at the University of Chicago. Welcome both of you to Chicago tonight. Tom Ginsberg, to that question of war crimes, we've all seen the video evidence seeming to mount every day, but will anyone ever be held accountable for those?
Right. Well, there's essentially two ways that people could be held accountable. One would be the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, which is reviewing these things and does have jurisdiction over war crimes committed in the Ukraine. But the other, and the perhaps more likely way we would see accountability, is through national courts applying something called universal jurisdiction. So we're seeing courts in Poland and investigators in Lithuania and such begin to think about prosecutions. And then, of course, there's Ukraine itself, which has said that it may have some prosecutions for war crimes committed in its territory.
And Tom Ginsberg, what role does the UN play here, or is it a difficult role given the fact that Russia is on the Security Council?
Right. So for the overall conflict, Russia being on the Security Council will prevent the Security Council from acting. But there are many other parts of the UN system. There's a Human Rights Council, there's the General Assembly, there are other actors, and of course resources that those actors can deploy to facilitate more accountability for these crimes. And most of that will last a very long time. That is the accountability. There's no statute of limitations for many of these crimes.
All right, and let's hear from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who visited Ukraine's capital on Thursday to meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky to see the destruction wrought by Russia's invasion. And he also had this to say about the Security Council.
Let me be very clear. The Security Council failed to do everything in its power to prevent and end this war. And this is a source of great disappointment, frustration, and anger.
Elizabeth Shackelford, we also mentioned that President Biden is asking Congress to approve this $33 billion aid package for Ukraine. It's being bottled up right now. Do you think it ultimately will be approved, and how impactful could this round be?
I think it likely will be approved, at least the vast majority of it. Right now, there's a lot of interest in Congress in doing whatever we can to help Ukraine in this situation. And it will be very important. The military aid in particular is a critical part of a two-pronged strategy between the sanctions regime that the United States is doing with a number of our partners, which is to prevent Russia from accessing the funds that it needs to continue perpetrating the war. And then the military assistance on the other side of that is absolutely essential to raise the cost of that war. So it's really relies on both. And I think that what we're seeing in terms of military assistance in particular is pretty unprecedented, and it's going to be essential for what's likely to be a drawn-out war.
And Elizabeth Shackelford, you've been very outspoken about your belief in the need for more resources for the State Department. We just saw a delegation led by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in Ukraine. What is the role of diplomacy here in assisting Ukraine in coming to a final resolution of this conflict?
Well, there are a number of different areas that diplomacy is going to be important right now. Probably the least of which is going to be direct diplomacy between the United States and Russia. I mean, that's a place where the United States simply doesn't have the leverage that some other players do. But for example, what the United States has been doing since all the way back in the fall has been working very closely with our European allies and other allies around the world in order to build this united front. Once the invasion began, there was a very solid front from the West in particular to target Russia with really damaging sanctions. And that just continued along the way, building up and calibrating with our partners, which has been essential. The United States can't do this on our own. But there are also some other avenues that we can work on through diplomacy, such as looking at the players who have more influence on Russia, who might be able to give them some economic relief from the sanctions regime that we have in place, and working with them to see what we can do to bring them over to our side. Because the more countries that you have that are shutting Russia off from economic resources, the harder it's going to be for Russia to continue.
Tom Ginsburg, getting back to this question of war crimes, you mentioned all the different routes that prosecution could take. Are we just looking at soldiers, commanders, generals, or how high up the food chain could this go, all the way up to Vladimir Putin himself?
Right. So there's individual war crimes being committed by soldiers, and there certainly could be accountability for that. But then there's also an international law doctrine called command responsibility, where a commander who knows that these events were likely to occur could also be held, I guess, vicariously liable for those actions. And that dates back to World War II, and I think would be appropriate in this case, given that this seems to be part of the training of the Russian army to act in these brutal ways. Putin himself is tougher. There's head of state immunity right now that he enjoys. And unless he was to become a former head of state, that would obviously keep other countries from exercising jurisdiction over him. It's also unclear if he could be held accountable for the ultimate crime here, which is the crime of aggression. That is, launching this war in the first place is a crime in international law, and it would seem to be that he'd be the person responsible. But it's not clear what forum exists to actually try him for that.
So that might be an unlikely outcome here. Elizabeth Shackelford, we're seeing reports now citing U.S. intelligence that says Russia in the coming days wants to annex larger portions of eastern Ukraine. Do you think they'll be successful in doing that, or can Ukraine and their allied forces hold that off?
Well, what we've been seeing in recent days is, there have been incursions, and then the Russians have been pushed back again. So it's really hard to get a sense of what their capacity on the ground is to really hold more territory than what they have right now. The military situation is not going according to plan for Putin's army. So I imagine that they can do a lot of damage. They have a lot of artillery, a lot of ammunition, and they do have quite a number of troops. But it's a very different question to ask whether or not they can hold it. And then, if they can hold it for some time, how long is that? I mean, the ultimate end game for Russia right now is to control more of this territory, and we've seen a tremendous amount of resistance by the Ukrainian people. So I think it's going to be, the question is, time is on whose side in this scenario. And I think they're going to be able to do plenty of damage. And unless they're able to negotiate a resolution, though, I don't see how long Russia's going to be able to kind of hold territory in the long run.
So it certainly seems like a quagmire for the foreseeable future here for both sides. And our thanks to Elizabeth Shackelford and Tom Ginsburg for joining us. Thank you so much. And now to Brandis for a look at the impact of a grocery store leaving Chicago's South Side. Brandis.
In Paris, after just 6 years, Whole Foods announces it is checking out of Englewood. The grocery chain's departure is a big blow to the South Side neighborhood that's long suffered from a lack of healthy food options. Joining us now with more on addressing food insecurity and food deserts in Chicago are Liz Abuna, owner of 40 Acres Fresh Market, a grocery business launched in 2018 to address food access in the Austin neighborhood. Aisha Butler, co-founder and CEO of RAGE, that's the Resident Association of Greater Englewood. And Dion Dawson, founder of Dion's Chicago Dream, a nonprofit delivering boxes of free fresh produce throughout Chicago. Welcome all of you back to Chicago tonight. Aisha, let's start with you, please. How surprised were you by this announcement from Whole Foods?
The day of, I was a bit surprised, but we actually been hearing rumors for probably like the last 2 years. A couple of times it was said to me that they were possibly closing, but when the reality came, it was a bit of a shocker.
When you were hearing these rumors, was there also speculation about why?
Well, when I heard those rumors, I'm still in very close contact with the former CEO, and I also talked to the developer, and I went right to them when I heard them. And they were saying that the sales were low, but this was right before COVID, and they were still going to stick it out. And then I'm not sure what happened after COVID. I heard it again, probably in December. And then only thing I heard was that it was low performing. It wasn't a lot of traffic. And then finally, just the decision I heard, on Friday morning.
Okay. So State Representative Sonia Harper, who represents the area, released a statement saying, quote, "I was proud to work with Whole Foods to bring a new location to Englewood because they claimed their decision was not based on profitability, but rather a desire to help provide access to healthy groceries for residents." Liz, you are in the grocery business. Do grocery stores need to be held to a higher standard or higher moral standard than other business people?
I think grocery stores should be held to their word. So if your word is that it's not about profitability, then I think you have to give the store more time to gain that profitability and traction. And we also have to remember that Whole Foods went through a huge ownership change not long after the store opened. The ownership of Whole Foods is very different than the ownership of Amazon and what they value. And from the feedback I have heard is that was immediately evident in the store over time, that it wasn't the same Whole Foods once Amazon took over the Whole Foods name.
Deion Dawson, you figured out how to get healthy food to people without having, the cost of an actual building. Tell us about your nonprofit.
Definitely. Our nonprofit focuses on providing brand new fruits and vegetables and stabilizing access to that quality. And so, in thinking about our solution, we had to have an option that focused on the end user experience, focused on the resident. And when you're thinking about the resident and you're talking to the resident and you're generating this data and of the perceptions and how to get it to them with the least amount of interruptions, that's what we decided to champion. And so we've been able to create a direct-to-consumer option where we provide 5 days worth of brand new fresh produce directly to the doorsteps of residents all over the Chicagoland area. Because of moments like this where something could come and interrupt that access, we just had to create something that is always focused on the resident and not having to worry about a brick and mortar location all the time. I think all of these work together, but it's definitely a good option to have.
And Deion, you started in Englewood. What are your thoughts on Whole Foods' departure from the neighborhood?
Well, I mean, the good thing about it is Aisha is my mentor and somebody whose opinion I respect. So when we're talking development side, that's what she's versed at, you know what I mean? But I am first and foremost an Englewood resident. And, when you hear about Whole Foods leaving, there's a lot of different, reasons or emotions, but I can't get stuck on it. Immediately, my mind just goes to what Englewood is about, and that's about surviving, that's about persevering, and it's about understanding what that next man up is gonna be. And so, I could say I'm upset or I'm happy, but I'm just focused on our residents that's there, because the beautiful thing about what we've been able to do and build is that within 24 hours of that announcement, my organization still got out 3,000 pounds of fresh produce within a 1 mile radius of the store. And so, on one hand, this is unfortunate. On the other hand, that is why leaders like Aisha and Liz and myself are all around the city doing what we can to reimagine what the future can look like for our residents.
And of course, getting Whole Foods to Englewood, those 6 years ago, took work from local organizers like you all, but also financial incentives from the city under former Mayor Rahm Emanuel that included an $11 million tax increment financing subsidy. Aisha, how do you feel, or how would you feel about the city helping to, offer millions in incentives to another grocery chain to replace it?
I would probably want them to look within first for those incentives. That's the conversations that we've been having, that this is an opportunity for us to really hone in into our own assets within the community. Folks like Deion, it's models like 40 Acres, that can be a model here in our community. People do want to see things that they can relate to. And in the beginning, Whole Foods felt that way because community was involved. And I just think that we proved that we can do something very similar, and we may not need that acre to do it.
Liz, your plan is to open a 40 acres fresh market in 2023 in another one of the city's food deserts, the West Side neighborhood of Austin. You received a $2.5 million neighborhood opportunity grant from the city to build your grocery store. Should grocery stores, especially, like the ones that we're talking about maybe with Asia, if they are more locally owned, should they be eligible for more grocery government subsidies that other businesses maybe don't have access to?
Absolutely. They're a necessary business, and the capital cost to build out new grocery stores where they didn't exist is honestly far more than most businesses, especially smaller local businesses, can take on by themselves. I also would let people know that grocery stores are not simply about the transaction of selling groceries. They drive public health in a neighborhood, not just from the fact that they sell healthy food, but that they revitalize and activate space. So space isn't vacant and dormant, which is a breeding ground for crime. They provide jobs. They increase home values. There's social infrastructure where neighbors go and you run into your neighbors and you create those cohesive community bonds that make communities safer, more vibrant, and places that people enjoy living in. And so really, they're far more than just a business. They're a public health benefit. And if you look at them like that, then they're ripe for government subsidy and investment, at least in the initial startup phase, because you then give that store at least a fighting chance of sustainability and survival, so they're not weighed down by the initial startup debt to get all of the infrastructure in place.
And we've got about 20 seconds left, but what are your hopes for residents of Englewood and how they might continue to see healthy foods? What could replace that location?
I think it's with everybody right now. It's about understanding there's a Beyond Chicago dream. There still is a 40 acres model. Out west, we're not operating in silos. There's a growing home. There's the Go Green Market on 63rd right off Racine. We have those options, and it's very important that we stop operating in silos and we all band together, because we're not just reactive. We're all proactive, and we're all in this together.
That's where we'll have to leave it. Aisha Butler, Deion Dawson, and Liz Abuno, thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, a trip back in time to the Black Victorian era. Stay with us.
Certainly we can celebrate, but we also have to recognize what so many people have gone through because of racism and what people continue to go through.
I think that Americans are finally beginning to embrace that we are African, we are indigenous, we are European, we are Asian, we are everything.
Period TV dramas like Bridgerton and The Gilded Age have blown up in popularity. So, a new show at the Goodman Theater is exploring the Victorian era as well, but specifically for Black Americans. Arts correspondent Angel Ito introduces us to Relentless and shares how this exploration of Black history is American history.
Inspired by her love for the Harlem Renaissance and the Victorian era, playwright Tyla Abercrombie felt compelled to write a story focused on that time period, but from a perspective not frequently seen.
And I realized that nobody talked about the Black Victorians. And nobody still talks about them. Maybe one or two, Madam C.J. Walker, W.B. Du Bois, but there were countless beautiful Black folk making a difference in the world, and it's a lost era. And I think that it's important that we remember who we were to know who we can become.
Set in 1919, the story explores an uncovering of family secrets, history, and identity when two sisters, Annelle and Janet, are forced to return home to Philadelphia to settle their mother's estate after her death.
Goodness, Janet! I have practically fallen down a complete flight of stairs and you barely noticed.
While fictional, the story does highlight some historical events.
What they are examining in 1919 is the unrest of Red Summer, which took place here in Chicago, that was caused through, a young Black boy drifting into the white side of the lake. When I wrote the play, was trying to examine what are we still seeing that we thought we had conquered, but we haven't.
Director Ron O.J. Parson says while fictional, Relentless is a reflection of the role people of color played during this time, as their stories have often been left out of history.
White and black, Asian, everybody, to learn that we were a viable force in this country in the early stages, and a lot of these things that we were doing are still part of our society today.
Roberta Brown of Hazelcrest agrees, noting both positive and negative parallels between then and now.
The whole idea of blacks in the Victorian age is not really something that we think about because we're not free. You know, we're still struggling. I mean, the things she was talking about, the one daughter, you know, that's talking about the fear that she has, you know, the fact that they're living in, you know, tumultuous times, 1919, and here we are in 2022, and the issues are still the same.
Even though the story explores challenges this country might not have fully overcome, Abercrombie says her message has not only been well received, but understood.
A Japanese American came to me after a performance, and he said he could relate to the journals and the mother because his parents were in internment camps. And though he was not, he understood their fear in the way they raised him.
No matter if I'm here or not, I will always shine brightly over you.
I want to inspire people to movement, right? And I want them to walk away knowing something more about what we as a culture have contributed to all of us. I have always said I don't believe that there's this thing called Black history. It's American history. And I want people to understand that I'm giving you a part of your history, not just mine.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Relentless runs at the Goodman Theater through May 8th. And now, Paris, back to you.
All right, Brandis, thanks very much. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, the average cost of new homes is at its highest point in at least 15 years. That and more business news from Cranes. Chicago's got a new watchdog, Deborah Witzberg. We talk policing, corruption, and indictments in our one-on-one. Therapists say early intervention is key to treating autism. Then why are black and brown kids more likely to be diagnosed at an older age? Plus, a woman's passion to create pop-up libraries and help heal young people from trauma. We'll share her story. But first, some more of today's top stories. Embattled R&B superstar R. Kelly's new defense attorney is challenging his Chicago trial, which is just 3 months away. Attorney Jennifer Bonjean filed a motion seeking to dismiss several charges against Kelly, claiming prosecutors filed them a decade too late. The counts accuse Kelly of exploiting a minor to create child pornography and for seeking to obtain child pornography himself. Kelly was convicted of racketeering in Brooklyn late last year and is already facing a potential life sentence in federal prison. He's currently in a federal detention center in New York. The city has officially closed its fourth round of COVID-19 emergency rental assistance to renters and landlords. In total, the city provided over 30,000 households with more than $170 million in direct rent and utility payments, exhausting currently available funds. This program was funded in part through the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Chicago Department of Housing Commissioner Marissa Novara says they are now shifting efforts toward creating long-term programs and services to assist renters, but no plan has yet been released. And now to Brandis for some of today's top business headlines. Brandis.
Thanks, Paris. State Farm customers will notice an increase in their car insurance rates again. Prices of new homes take the biggest leap in at least 15 years. And a Fulton Market developer has big plans for a property near one of the city's proposed casino sites. Here to help us go behind the headlines is Crane Chicago business reporter Danny Eckert. Danny, welcome back. So State Farm says it's raising Illinois auto insurance rates by 3% next month. Now, this is just after a 5% rate hike took effect 2 weeks ago. Why the second jump this year?
You know, it's not really clear why they're doing this sort of piecemeal, but this is in line with what all their rivals are doing, Allstate and Progressive and Geico and others. Between this hike and the one that was just enacted, the average State Farm auto policy premium will be going up by nearly $60 per year. And State Farm says it's all mostly from inflation. The cost of labor and goods are up, and so claim costs are higher, and that's translating into higher rates for auto insurance. And the frustration, I think, from consumer advocates is that, a lot of these auto insurers did quite well early in the pandemic when people were staying at home, and now the rates are going up, and they're not very happy about that. But State Farm says their auto insurance rates are still below pre-COVID levels.
Okay, so prices for new homes in the Chicago area rose by an average of $50,000 this past year. I'm sure home buyers noticed that. What is driving this jump in the cost, Danny?
Well, it's everything. Just costs more these days. Obviously, again, higher costs of materials and labor. There's high demand. Builders have not been able to keep pace really with the demand because of supply chain issues, and so that's meant low inventory and high prices. And for perspective, the price jumps since the beginning of 2021 are actually the biggest annual increases in 15 years. The expectation is that interest rates being higher might cool that off, but we'll see.
Okay, and lastly, you reported on a recent purchase by a property developer in the River West neighborhood. Tell us about this and why it caught your attention.
Yeah, it's a big Salvation Army property in River West. Many people know this property for its water tower with the Salvation Army logo that overlooks the Ohio Street feeder ramp. This property was purchased by Shapack Partners, which is one of the most prolific Fulton Market developers, known for some office buildings and hotels there. Bought this property from the Salvation Army and is planning likely what will be a hotel there. And it's especially interesting in many ways, but it's also because it's right next to the Tribune printing plant site that is one of the 3 finalists to be the site of the city casino. So obviously Shapack is betting that there's a lot of rush of activity that's coming to this area, and so we'll see what happens with this property.
Okay, that'll be an interesting one to watch. Danny Ecker at Cranes, thanks so much.
Thanks.
And now, Paris, back to you.
Brandis, after nearly 200 days, Chicago finally has a confirmed full-time Inspector General. Deborah Witzberg served as Deputy Inspector General for Public Safety, and she was confirmed unanimously to the post that was previously held by Joe Ferguson. It comes at a crucial time for the city, with the Chicago Police Department struggling to keep pace with federally mandated reforms and a steady stream of corruption, investigations, indictments, and convictions rocking council in recent years. And joining us now is Chicago Inspector General Deborah Witzberg. Deborah Witzberg, welcome back to Chicago Tonight. Congratulations to you on finally being confirmed. We've reported on the scope of work that this office has done. What are your immediate priorities now that you've taken over full-time?
Thanks, Paris. Really to continue on with the good work that the office has been doing. There's a great deal to do, and there's a lot of good work underway.
In various departments. One of those, and this is an area you know very well, public safety, the consent decree process, it's going to go on for years. CPD has said it's in compliance with 70% of the mandates, but the monitor has complained that it's not happening fast enough. What does CPD need to do to be more in compliance?
Police reform and police oversight will continue to be among this office's highest priorities. Both police accountability and violence reduction are at the top of the list of Chicagoans' priorities, certainly. I think we really need to direct our thinking toward a world in which we do not think about police reform and violence reduction as alternatives to each other, but rather as kind of necessary components. We need to reform the police department not instead of fighting violent crime, but so that we can more effectively keep people safe.
And one of the components of this reform process that your office has been critical of is a foot pursuit policy. The mayor came out with an initial foot pursuit policy after the deaths of Adam Toledo and Anthony Alvarez. It was roundly criticized. What does the CPD's foot pursuit policy need to look like?
That isn't something we've looked at specifically, and so I don't want to comment on that here, but I am cognizant of the fact that that is one of the policy changes about which people are really concerned. We're anxious to hear from Chicagoans about their experiences and their concerns, as well as from department members.
And your office in the past has also been adamant about the need for a database of police complaints. That's something that city council members came to an agreement on last year, but that has been bottled up. So a public database of police misconduct. Talk about the need for that.
That's a transparency initiative. That is driven by the notion that Chicagoans, taxpayers, are entitled to know what the disciplinary landscape looks like with respect to the members of the police department serving in their communities. And so OIG has done a great deal of transparency work around lots of components of the operation of city government, including but not limited to police complaints and police investigations. We'll continue with that work.
And do you believe it's the role of the office not only to come up with these kinds of recommendations, but then to perhaps use leverage to pass ordinances like this, or to convince city council members to at least consider them?
I think there are lots of opportunities for us to work with other components of city government to maximize the impact of OIG's work. And whenever and wherever we can take advantage of those opportunities to cooperate without sacrificing the independence of the office, we will do that.
I want to move to the other big area here that your office is focused on, public corruption. Just last week, we saw 45th Ward Alderman Jim Gardner's hand-picked ward superintendent arrested for attempting to sell a machine gun on city time. Your office in the past has argued that alder people should not be hiring these ward superintendents. They could be patronage jobs. Is this an example of why your office has advocated that this should not be a position hired by an alder person?
I don't want to comment on a specific investigation or a specific employee, but I will say that we have made both programmatic recommendations, as you say, with respect to how the people in certain positions are hired. I also take very seriously the responsibility of the office to hold those who abuse the public trust to account.
And speaking of those that have abused the public trust, we mentioned the steady stream in recent years. We reported that Alderman Gardner himself is under federal investigation. It follows alder people like Daley Thompson, Carrie Austin, Ed Burke, Danny Solis, and onward. What is the crux of why this kind of public corruption remains a stubborn problem with City Council?
This is a problem of institutional culture. We talk about this with respect to the police department, and I think there's a similar conversation to be had in Chicago government at large. We are in a city where our government operates at a legitimacy deficit, and acts of public corruption by public officials contribute to that deficit of trust and legitimacy.
And very recently, Alderwoman Michelle Smith has proposed beefing up ethics fines from $5,000 to $20,000 for city council members that violate the ethics ordinance. Is this something that your office supports?
Without getting into the specific proposed legislation, I will say that the corruption is a nail that needs a lot of hammers. And so we look forward to working with Chairwoman Smith's committee.
Speaking of a lot of hammers, Mayor Lightfoot has said after Joe Ferguson left that she wants someone that will, quote, stay in their lane. What do you interpret that to mean?
I won't speak for the mayor, but I will say that I will do everything in my power to ensure that OIG occupies every corner of its legal mandate, which is a broad one. I didn't back down from difficult questions or problems as Deputy IG for Public Safety, and I won't do so as Inspector General.
And we mentioned the former Inspector General Joe Ferguson stepped down nearly 200 days before your confirmation here last week. How did this lengthy absence impact the work of the Inspector General's office? And we should mention you were the Deputy Inspector General. You left so you could seek this post. But has it impacted the work at all to have such a long period of time without a full-time confirmed Inspector General?
This office is staffed by incredibly smart and competent and committed people, and they have continued with their admirable work. It is the case that this office is not built to be without permanent term protected leadership for this long. And so that's a process that needs to happen faster, should have gotten started sooner. And I think the municipal code, the law that governs the selection process, probably bears some adjustment to ensure that we don't find ourselves in a similar situation in the future.
You're saying that you might advocate for some kind of change to the municipal code to make sure it doesn't happen?
I think that's worth looking at for sure.
Is it impacting anything that you have to do right off the bat, the fact that it lasted this long?
I'm very glad to be coming to this, having spent 6 years at OIG. I think that positions me well to stay out of the way where things are going well and to move quickly to address challenges where they exist. And so the work of this office will continue to be powerful and impactful. We would all have been better off if this process had gone faster.
All right. Deborah Witzberg, best of luck to you in this position, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And up next, what to be on the lookout for when identifying autism symptoms in kids. That's a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. But first, we take a look at the weather.
The CDC defines autism as a developmental disability that can cause a wide range of challenges in social interaction, communication, and behavior. It affects about 1 in 44 children. Therapists say early intervention is key to treating autism, and Black children are 5 times more likely to be misdiagnosed or diagnosed later in life. Joining us now with more are Nikki Griffin, a board-certified behavior analyst and clinical manager at Envision Unlimited, a Chicago-based nonprofit serving adults and children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And Cynthia Pierre, a clinical psychologist at Rush University Medical Center's Autism Center. Thank you both for joining us. Cynthia Pierre, let's start with you. Please explain what is autism and how it presents in children.
So when we think about autism, it is a neurodevelopmental disorder that presents very early in life. Children are born with this condition, and what we see are 2 categories or types of symptoms that we're looking for. We're looking for deficits or delays in social communication functioning. So when we think about a conversation or even a nonverbal interaction, there's a back and forth that we're looking for, and also a certain nonverbal quality to it. And so children who present with autism might struggle with some of those verbal and nonverbal back and forth skills, which impact friendships and academic functioning. What we also notice and what we're looking for in terms of symptoms include repetitive and restricted behavior. So very strong interest in activities, and insistence on sameness, right? So difficulty transitioning between one activity to the next. Unusual motor movements or mannerisms, as well as sensory sensitivities or sensory seeking behavior. So when we look at diagnosing autism, we're looking for those 2 categories of behavior to be present from an early point in childhood.
And Nikki Griffin, speaking of that early point in childhood, why is early diagnosis and intervention so important?
So it's very important that we start to intervene as soon as possible, because that is already a very important time for a child when they're picking up a lot of skills. They are learning from their peers, they're learning from adults in their lives, and best time to kind of come in and teach them the skills that they might be lacking, particularly when they're on the autism spectrum. If we wait too late to try to step in and provide those interventions, it's not to say that those interventions won't be successful, but it might take longer for those interventions to see success, to come to fruition, just because the child would have had the opportunity at that point to, bad habits. They would have had years to kind of cement the, inappropriate styles of play, inappropriate styles of communication that they might have failed to learn appropriately if we don't intervene soon enough.
And as we've just said, Black and brown children are more likely to be diagnosed later in life than white children. Nikki, what do you attribute that disparity to?
I think there are a lot of reasons, but I think one of the biggest reasons is simply lack of access to the medical professionals that they need to be able to access in order to receive those diagnoses. So if you think your child might have autism and you have to then go to a specialist, you have to go to repeated appointments, you have to travel all around the city to find those specialists. Those kinds of things are very time intensive and very money intensive. And that can be very difficult for a lot of individuals to be able to access.
Nikki, sticking with you for just one more second, what kind of work are you and your team at Envision Unlimited doing to help bridge that gap?
So at Envision Unlimited, as you mentioned earlier, we are a nonprofit that has been in Chicagoland for 74 years. Mainly, we've been serving adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities, but now we are expanding into the world of children, children's ABA specifically. So in order to address the lack of access, we are providing services directly in the home. So we are eliminating that need for the family to have to go somewhere, take their child somewhere. We come to them exactly, wherever they are. We are able to eliminate the need for the parent to rearrange their schedule so their child can get therapy. We work with the family to make sure that we can provide what they need when they are available for it. We also provide parent training along with the therapy to the children. So we provide direct therapy to the children, and then we provide parent training so that the family knows how to provide the same types of interventions, the same types of strategies to their child when we aren't available to be there.
Now, from data collected from Envision Unlimited, a report found that in Illinois, the number of people ages 3 to 21 diagnosed with autism increased 500% from 1999 to 2015. Cynthia, of course, I know you're at Rush, but what do these numbers tell us about the rate of autism in the U.S.? Are more people being born with autism, more people developing autism, or are we just getting better at diagnosing and identifying it?
You know, I think that's a question that a lot of parents come to us asking, and I think it's a very, relevant question. I think that we don't know all the answers in terms of really understanding the genetic underpinnings of autism, any environmental factors that might make it more likely for a child to be born with autism. However, what we do know is that our tools and our ability to identify more subtle presentations of autism have improved substantially in the past 15 or so years. And so what that means is that folks who are coming in to a clinic who may have been just identified as having, anxiety, or maybe they're just, an introvert, they might be correctly diagnosed with autism because of the quality of the tools that we have.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I know that we could talk about this for a lot longer, but my thanks to Nikki Griffin and Cynthia Pierre for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Literature is used to mold young minds, but a nonprofit is hoping that it goes beyond that. A local woman began an organization using books to help children heal from trauma. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez tells us more about the local and international effort.
How many of you love books? Do you guys have a favorite book?
Meet Sina Jacob. She is the founder of the nonprofit Bookwala.
Wait, what? Bookwala.
More than a dozen kids recently gathered at our local Boys and Girls Club for a storytelling session. Jacob founded the organization back in 2009 when she says she began to question her life purpose and started to visit orphanages around the world.
We traveled to Indonesia, India, Jamaica, Sri Lanka, passed out storybooks donated by kids here in the United States, which is fantastic. And the reaction that I saw on the ground in orphanages and for children, again, of trauma, the way they were looking with this faraway look, the way they were excited about the pop-up books, I just knew that I couldn't go back to the old way of life, my corporate life.
That's when the Magic Crate program came to life. Small pop-up libraries placed in schools and orphanages.
But I found that these books and the messages in these stories, which all children need to hear, the hero's journey, the hero's struggle, and overcoming something, coming out stronger, a happier world. It's so very critical, and especially for children who have lived with fear or insecurities or any type of trauma at all. And so reading is one of those major outlets where they too can relive that journey, overcome it, and realize that they could create a better world for themselves.
What started globally has slowly grown locally. Magic Crate can now be found in Chicago, filled with a variety of books for kids to take.
So we have it in corner stores, barbershops, related affordable homes.
I got this book on More Than a Princess, and because she's pretty and she's like a princess, but she's more than a princess.
Mother and teacher Nancy Unzeta says the Magic Crates encourage kids to explore different topics.
I believe the crates like this are going to open that question into parents. Children are going to come home with these books at home and ask for more books. They're going to ask parents to come into the program, and parents are going to be remembered of the importance of taking a break and sitting down with your child, bonding and reading.
For Jacob, her mission is driven from the passion she has of empowering kids to heal and dream.
Need help with this word.
No child should ever cry at night, right? No child should ever cry. And we want to see them smile and laugh and all those things. And if we can give a simple gift like this and have that much power and magic, why not do it?
Jacob says her goal for Bookwala is to keep expanding in Chicago.
I truly believe that if these books were not here for me, I would not be here today. I believe these stories saved my life, and I know it has the power to save other children's lives.
So go ahead and grab anything you wish.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
And you can learn more about Bookwalla on our website. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing, and you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Local Congress members discuss canceling student debt, another aid package for Ukraine, and much more.
Plus, auctioning memorabilia from the Matrix movies. We speak with Matrix co-creator Lily Wachowski about Hollywood history on the auction block. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a proud sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused free continuing legal education for lawyers throughout the region.